Hello and welcome to this Chemistry World webinar. I'm Ben Velsler, Chemistry World's digital editor. And also on screen, you'll see Steve Churchill, who is a BSL to English interpreter. We're delighted to say that this entire webinar will be interpreted into sign language by Steve and Rachel Dance, who will be joining us a little bit later on. If you are able to make use of the interpretation, then you'll be pleased to know that GoToWebinar, the platform we're using, will allow you to move the cameras around the screen to make them larger or smaller, whatever is best for you. So have a quick play with it now while we're doing the introduction so that you'll make sure that your interpreter is in exactly the right place for you to make the most of the content coming up over the next hour. Now, today we are looking at mental health and access to nature and the impact that nature can have on our mental well-being. That is to coincide with the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week, which is the 10th and 16th of May. And poor mental health can affect people at any stage in their life and at any walk of life. And apparently chemists are people too. And so we thought at Chemistry World and working with the I&D team at the RSC that it would be very important to look at mental health for you as an audience of chemical scientists. Now, that doesn't mean that we're looking at the chemistry of nature or the chemistry of mental health, although do feel free to ask questions about that because of course we know it's close to your hearts. But we're taking a step back and looking more broadly. Spending time in nature can have profoundly positive impact on our mental well-being, whether that's taking part in a physical activity, park run, for example, or caring for plants, or simply just relaxing and enjoying the green spaces around us. So there are very few doubts about the positive effects that it can bring. But unfortunately, not everybody has equal access to nature, and we've certainly seen that in the last 12 months, as some people have been locked down without access to nature, and the combination of being locked down and not being able to get to nature has had a devastating impact on some people's mental health. So we think it's important to recognize and address the inequalities and how nature in its many forms could be made more accessible to all. So we're going to learn about the connections between nature and mental well-being and the importance of moving towards a more inclusive chemical sciences community. We have three guest speakers today. We have Patricia Zarita, who is from BirdLife International, Anjana Katwa, who's from Wessex Museums, and Alistair Griffiths from the Royal Horticultural Society, and they will be coming up very shortly. We'll be looking at the benefits of having access to nature on mental health and well-being. We're looking at what it means to have access to nature and green spaces, as well as, importantly, the inequalities of access and how nature can be made more accessible. And we'll also be looking at the importance of environmental preservation to mental well-being. Now, throughout this, we will have presentations. We don't share the slides from Chemistry World webinars because what we will do is make a recording available. We think what is important is not just what you can see on the PowerPoint slide, but actually the words that are being said and the context and interplay between them. So we won't be sharing slides, but we will send you a link to the recording. And as a little thank you to everybody who has attended live, we'll also send you a certificate of attendance. So keep an eye in your inbox for that. That will get to you fairly soon. Now, our first speaker for today is Patricia Zarita. As I said, she is from BirdLife International. She's the Chief Executive Officer of BirdLife International, which is the world's largest nature conservation partnership, bringing together over 115 organizations worldwide to conserve birds, their habitats, and global biodiversity. I was a little surprised, given the global nature of BirdLife International, to discover that Patricia lives here in Cambridge, where a lot of the RSC are based. So she's suffering from the same slightly sketchy weather and dodgy traffic that us Cambridge-based RSC people are having today. And she has also had one or two connection issues today, so please bear with her. If you find that the connection freezes or stutters, please just wait. It should come back, it should catch up, so don't worry too much if you have those sorts of problems. I'll hand over to Patricia in just a minute, but first of all, we just wanted to get a general idea from you, and we're going to do this as a poll, whether being close to nature or by visiting nature is something that's helped you through the pandemic. So I'm going to share the poll in just a second. When we do, that will override Steve, so I'm going to keep relatively quiet throughout it, and then we will hand over to Patricia and discuss the results there. So let's get this poll launched. Okay, I think that is enough time, so I shall close the poll now. And the cameras should come back in just a second, so you'll be able to see Steve again. So thank you to everybody for having a crack at that poll there. I don't need to show you the graph, but I can assure you it's pretty overwhelming. 96% of you have said that being close to nature or visiting nature has made a difference to you throughout the pandemic. Just 4% saying no. I don't know if those 4% was because they haven't had access or because they just don't find it makes any difference. If it's about not having access, then this is definitely the conversation that we'd like you to be involved with today. Let us know your experiences, and especially if you found that you struggled to have access to nature during the pandemic, and ways you found around it would be really useful for us to share with everyone else. But now we're going to invite Patricia to join us, and we will share Patricia's screen. We'll see her presentation, and then I'll come back to you a bit later on. So we'll get Patricia up now, assuming her connection has not unfortunately fallen out during my introduction. This already looks very promising.
I think we're good, Ben. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You probably wouldn't have been surprised by 96% saying that yes, access to nature had made a significant difference to their experience of the pandemic.
No, it's absolutely fabulous. And I am actually wondering, what am I going to talk about then if all of you have been enjoying nature? Well, thank you so much for having me. As you heard, I'm Patricia Sweet. I'm the Chief Executive of BirdLife International. Can you guys see the full slides?
We can certainly see PowerPoint, yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, keeps going out. Okay. So it is a pleasure to be with all of you, and thank you so much to Ben and Laura for inviting me. For those of you who don't know about BirdLife, BirdLife is an incredible family of national conservation organizations in more than 115 countries around the world, coming together under the umbrella of Birds to Save Life. We are the largest partnership for nature. We are in more countries than any other international conservation organization on the planet. We are truly the power of many. We connect the world by bringing people together around the wonderful world of birds, but using birds as an extraordinary ambassador to protect the rest of life. We are a scientific powerhouse. We are the global authority for birds. So we curate a lot of the data on birds, or all of the data on birds every year, but we use that data to guide all of our conservation action that goes way beyond birds and into all of the other species. So happy Mental Health Awareness Week. I am delighted that we are going to be talking about the role of nature in mental health and mental well-being. I want to start by speaking a lot about what has been happening with the world in general. The population of the planet has been moving towards a more urban setting. These are the numbers from the UN World Urbanization Prospects. And you can see through this graph how urban population in 2007 started overpassing the rural population. And it is projected that it's going to go much higher in the future. More than 4 billion people currently live in urban areas. 83.65% of the population in the UK live in urban areas in 2019. And by 2050, the UN is projecting that 60% of the population, that is going to be about 7 billion people, will be in cities. Now, the problem with that is that when we move into cities, we go further away from these amazing spaces. And not only in terms of the ability to explore and be close to nature, but also it pushes away from realizing the wonders of nature. For those of you who are in Europe or who live in Africa, you would have seen, or in Asia actually, you would have seen this amazing bird. Is common cuckoo. Not so common, unfortunately, these days. But this bird is the one that marks sort of the beginning of the spring in Europe. When it comes back from Africa and we start hearing the traditional cuckoo, we know that birds are migrating and they are coming. And this happens with a lot of birds. This is a common swift that actually was ringed in very close to us in Falmere. in a reserve south of Cambridge, and it actually moves all the way to Africa. Winters and in Central Africa, moves around Africa, and then comes back again to nest in Falmere in Cambridge. And it is these wonders of nature that we start missing the minute that we start living in cities. We don't realize that these things are happening. We stop paying attention. This is the migration path of swifts coming from Beijing, going all the way down to Southern Africa. And from my region, this amazing hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird, that flies from Central America all the way up to the eastern side of the United States and Canada. And as you can see in the picture here, is tiny. I mean, just imagine how something that weighs less than 2 or 3 grams can actually cross the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the cool thing about all of this is that nature is actually tending us a hand, and it is really there to help us with our well-being and our mental well-being. There's tons of benefits from nature. Nature improves your mood. It reduces your feelings of stress and anger. It helps you take time out and feel more relaxed, improves your physical health, improves your confidence and self-esteem, and helps you be more active and make connections, providing also peer support. And there are very interesting facts, and I'm so happy to see that the poll is so positive, because it only re-emphasizes all these great studies and information that we have been getting in the last couple of years. I found out, for example, that more than half of the UK adults say that being close to nature improved their mental health. And here we have just a sample from you guys. 4 in 10 people in the UK say that nature makes them feel less worried or anxious. 60% of people say they experience positive emotions when they're close to nature. And I found a study from Chicago that was reporting that people who live near green spaces show reductions in ADHD symptoms and greater calm, stronger sense of connection to neighbors, and less violence. So science is showing that nature is important, and I just want to point to the fact that a piece of nature is particularly important to make you happier, and that is birds. Birds are, we just got a report from that was published by the World Economic Forum, but also in Ecological Economics by Methurst this February, that was showing how birds are actually improving the quality of life, and that when you are closer to birds and to a diverse group of birds, you're feeling a lot happier and better off, and it actually is comparable, and in some cases higher, than the satisfaction that you get from your net household income. So really exciting to see how birds and the diversity of life can actually make us happier and healthier, both physically but also mentally. And the interesting thing about this is that it doesn't take that long. In a study that a couple of people did in 2019, and that was published in Scientific Reports, they showed that only by taking 120 minutes per week, that is less than 20 minutes a day, being close to nature, it actually helps you with your general health, but also with your well-being. And you guys have been reporting this already on your poll. So it is an extraordinary opportunity to really get not only close to what fills up with happiness and helps us maintain and improve our mental well-being, but it's also a huge opportunity to get connected to other people around the world. So in my last couple of minutes, I just want to point out to the importance of being out. It is hugely fulfilling. So go out, keep going out, keep enjoying nature, keep listening to the different things that are coming around, whether it is the sound of the cuckoos or the chirps of the swifts, or I was just having my first baby starling coming into my feeders today. Just pay attention to the little things. That's what makes us incredibly connected to a much different world and helps us feel in all of the great energy that nature has for us. Get immersed in it. Nature is absolutely wonderful, and it's just sitting down and just seeing a landscape like this just fills up with calmness, and it helps a lot of us be very mindful about our surroundings and center ourselves. Now I wanted to show you, and hopefully the technology will work, a video that it says that is paused. Can you guys see my screen? See if can you see it?
We can see it. It does seem to be paused on the Get Immersed screen.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So let's see if this actually works. But this is a video of the murmuration of starlings. Can you see that, Ben?
No, unfortunately we can't. I think we may have to skip over the video, but what we'll do is we'll share in the chat box a link to the video itself so that people can catch up with this afterwards. I think I hope people have seen videos of starling murmurations before. They are phenomenal things. They look like an organic living cloud, and in this case flying over Brighton Pier.
Yeah. Now you can use, I don't know what happened with my screen. Can you see now the starlings?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so Ben was talking about the starlings. I had a clip that is, for whatever reason, is not working that well, but it's a group of starlings, these amazing birds that get together, and when they're about to roost, they just make these amazing figures. And this is a real picture. This is not a Photoshop picture. This is a murmuration in Germany, in actually very close to Berlin, where I don't know why this is not working with me. But it actually made this amazing figure of a bird. So I actually use it a lot in my presentations. I just want to very quickly finish by saying nature is there for us, and it has been helping us, but it also needs a hand. Nature is at risk. Over the last 50 years, 68% of the wildlife populations of animals and plants have plummeted. We are destroying this planet faster than any other time that the planet has been alive. We have lost 90% of our wetlands in the last 3 centuries. We have drained them, we have built over them. We are destroying forests quicker than ever before. In 2019, we lost almost 12 million hectares of tropical forest. That is 1 football pitch every 6 seconds throughout the year. Just imagine that, a football pitch. And for those of you who are football or soccer fans, you know how big is a football pitch. Losing 1 of those of amazing tropical forest every 6 seconds throughout the year. And the problem that we're seeing is that our economy is set up in a way that we're using more money on harmful subsidies that are destroying nature than investing in what nature really needs. So nature is there. It wants to give us a hand, but right now it does need us to work with it. And I want to say there is a lot of hope. There are huge opportunities to get engaged with nature. Just to spread the word. People don't know that we are losing our natural world faster than ever. Make earth-friendly decisions every time that you do something, whether you're buying something, whether you're eating something, whether you are traveling somewhere. Just think about the impact on the planet. Volunteer if you're getting out into nature. There's loads of nature reserves that will be gladly getting a lot of volunteers to help them out. And lastly, if you don't want to volunteer, donate. Organizations like BirdLife, organizations like the ones that we are part of, the 115, need funds to help ensure that we're protecting and restoring nature. So that's my message to you. You can be part of the change. Get immersed in nature, continue to enjoy it. Remember that it's threatened, and you have the potential of helping the fate. And I want to thank everybody for coping with the technological problems that we were having, and for having me as a panelist.
Thank you, Patricia. Patricia will be sticking with us for the Q&A a bit later on, so thank you for sticking around with us for that. With regards Q&A, I can see quite a few of you have already found the questions box. If you haven't, then have a look at the bottom of the GoToWebinar panel, and you'll see there that there is a box that allows you to ask questions. We will do all three presentations first, and then we'll get to your Q&A. So do ask any questions that you have at any point. I know a lot of you ask questions during the registration. We've got those in a list here, and we'll do our best to get through some of those as well. So thank you for that. It's really important to have considered, interesting questions from our audience. Thank you once again to Patricia. Next, we are going to hand over to Anjana Katwa, who, as you can see on screen now, multi-award-winning earth scientist, engagement specialist, and TV presenter. But perhaps more importantly, the engagement lead at Wessex Museums, where she works on how to get underserved audiences into museum spaces. And that is a significant problem, and it's one that perhaps we don't really think about as much as we should. We are very lucky in the UK to have some fantastic museum resources, and historically free resources, but that is not enough barrier removal to make sure that we get all the people that we can into museums to really help them engage with the natural world, and in this case with the Jurassic Coast, which is a fantastic bit of the world and well worth a visit if you get a chance. So I will hand over to Anjana now, and we will see her screen as well. Once again, any questions you have for any of our speakers, please get them into that GoToWebinar questions box, and we'll come to some questions after Anjana's presentation and then after Alistair as well. Anjana, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ben. Can everybody see the slide of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
I have shared my screen. Wonderful. I'm going to start my timer so I stick to the times. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, this afternoon. That was an amazing talk by Patricia, because I think what it did was it set up what I'm going to talk about, which is at least a section of our society, many communities are missing out on what nature can offer them. And Patricia talked about that importance of, you know, the healing that nature can bring to us, that calmness and that sense of wonder. And what I'm really going to investigate now using some sets of data is really bringing up the disparity and the inequity that exists in our society, and particularly within the UK, about who has access to nature and who doesn't. So a little bit about me. I am an earth scientist. I'm a geologist. I specialise in rocks, fossils and landforms. I also work at Wessex Museums. And for a long time, for over 20 years, working in the natural heritage and the geosciences sector, my focus has been on how do I inspire and engage audiences about nature, about geology, rocks, fossils and landforms. How do I bring them that sense of wonder and that sense of place of where they are? And as I've moved into the museum sector, I've realised that actually the same issues that kind of bar different types of audiences from natural spaces are the same that exist within the museums world as well. So I've got a bit of a tough job at the moment. It's very, very exciting and stimulating, but it is hard. So I want to take you back to areas of my childhood, places, memories of my childhood. And there are two pictures here. On the left picture, that's me wearing the glasses with the hair that's been blown up. So it's a rather bad hair day for me. I'm with my family on a beach on the south coast near Portsmouth. It's Hayling Island in the UK. And that experience of a South Asian family going to the British seaside is one that many families would have done and do today. And especially since lockdown eased last year, was the seasides were full of families going and experiencing nature. The other picture is of me, and I'm the little girl at the end with the white t-shirt, and that's my family. There's at least 3 families in that photo, and we are on the Isle of Wight in front of the phenomenal Allen Bay Cliffs. Both pictures are memories of me being in natural landscapes. I grew up in a small town near Heathrow Airport called Slough, and it's a very urban space. The nearest green space I had was either my back garden or the school playing field or a local park. So I had very limited access to nature growing up. For our family, going to places like the seaside was this amazing venture into nature. But unfortunately, within the UK, there is a real disparity of who is welcome in these natural spaces. And in these two situations that I presented, so that picture at the Isle of Wight, that picture was taken around about 1982. The other one is probably around about 1991. In both pictures, me, my family, my parents, even my grandmother, we were all subject to racist comments. People were making comments about what my parents were wearing. So you can see in one of the pictures, my mother and my grandmother in traditional Indian dress. They made comments about our food, the way it smelt, and we were essentially made to feel like we did not belong, that we were not welcome in this space. And over time, this had an impact on our family. You know, it made us less likely to want to go to beautiful natural spaces. And what does this look like today? Because obviously I'm talking about my experiences of racism within green spaces over 30 years ago. If I bring you forward to 2011 here, this is a beautiful picture of an AONB, an Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty in Lancashire. Now, when we look at the demographic statistics for Lancashire, 90% of the population that live there are white, 10% identify as Black, Asian and minority ethnic. So where I was visiting with my family, places like the Isle of Wight and Portsmouth, and we were being told that, you know, we weren't welcome there. You know, parents would pull their children out of paddling pools when myself and my brother and sister went in. And that was a real memory. You know, as a child, I would wonder, why are they doing that, mummy? You know, why are they pulling their children out? It's because that family did not want their children mixing with us in the water. And that was a real experience of mine. So what does it look like today for families living as we would see it in a beautiful rural space? Surely they have access to nature all the time. Let's look at some of the demographic data to reveal what life is actually like for that community. When we look at the Black, Asian and minority ethnic population distribution in Lancashire, I want you to focus on the dark blue areas because these are the areas of very high population densities from minority communities, and Blackburn has 30%, Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. Preston is at 19.8%. And you can see the distribution as the colours get lighter, the numbers of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people decline. So that's quite an interesting demographic statistic to look at. If we put that data against where those people, those communities are living, let's look. So where we're looking at Blackburn here, actually much of that population is living in urban areas. So this is this greyish area here, and in the urban rural fringe areas, which is this brownish area here. And you can see that, can't you? You can see how the urban areas are dominated by those higher populations of Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. And I think it's quite interesting what Patricia said about more people moving to urban areas. Why are they moving there? Because of jobs, facilities, access to doctors, schools, so on and so forth. So this is where the majority of those Black, Asian, minority ethnic people are living. But what is life actually like on the ground for those communities? You've got the beautiful Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, the Forest of Bowland here on their doorstep. So just keep that in your mind. This is the landscape. So again, on the left, we've got the population distribution in terms of ethnicity. Let's take a look at multiple indices of deprivation. So what this data is telling us is these are communities and families living in poverty. And when we look at the deep red kind of districts here, we can see actually it is mostly these Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. There are some areas of white poverty here on the edge here near the coastline here, but predominantly those deprived areas are within areas which have high density of ethnic minorities. So not only are they living, these communities are living in urban areas, they're also living in high areas of deprivation. Let's dig a bit deeper into that. What about children? What is the life like? What is life like for a child from an ethnic minority background living in Lancashire? When we talk about free school meals in the UK, this is a socio-economic programme which provides meals within schools, hot meals within schools for children whose parents are on what we call social welfare benefits. So again, we have high levels of free school meals given to children who are coming from poorer backgrounds in Lancashire here, and they overlap with the Black, Asian, minority ethnic population. And I think that's really interesting because we've got high levels of child poverty overlapping with children living in urban areas, overlapping with Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. So we're starting to layer our demographic data. Let's now overlay that with access to nature. And I think this is the one that really shocks me when I look at it. When you look at the longer walking routes, so these are walking routes that have been set up and designated by the authority that manages this landscape. The green areas are really beautiful long walking routes, and they are within these protected landscapes like national parks. The red walking routes are smaller routes, but they tend not to be in kind of areas of serene natural beauty. Now let's look at where these communities are living in deprivation and the sheer level of distance between their accessibility to walking routes in nature. You can see actually for many of these communities, those walking routes are out of reach. And if you don't have a car and maybe you've got children perhaps under 5s that are very difficult, you know, they can't walk for very far. How on earth do you get your family out into nature? It is so difficult, and particularly in rural areas, because I live in a rural area myself in Dorset, the bus services aren't very good. And to get onto public transport and travel up to this beautiful area of outstanding natural beauty, this is beyond impossible for a family living in poverty in one of these high deprivation areas. So although the walks are there, perhaps the right people aren't, you know, by what I mean by saying right people, those families that are living in deprivation, that are being challenged in all sorts of ways, they don't have access to nature in the same way that others do. Now, the Ramblers, who I was an ambassador for last year, did a survey this year over lockdown, and they found that just 39% of their respondents that were Black and Asian lived within 5 minutes of a park, canal, path or field. They also did a survey asking different households with different incomes whether they could walk to a green space 5 minutes from home, and just look at the breakdown of this data. If you are in an affluent household, 70% of the respondents said they could walk to a green space that was 5 minutes from home. 46% that were on an income of less than 15,000 said, no, we can't. We have no access to green space within 5 minutes of our home. When you put all of that data together, what is the picture that we're looking at in the UK, particularly during the lockdown period? What it's indicating to us is that there are Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities living in urban areas with very high levels of deprivation. There's high levels of child poverty. And again, in your mind, think about what those children are experiencing day to day. They don't have access to nature like some other communities have the privilege to do so. And we know when we look at that data for Lancashire that it's the affluent white population that have the greatest access to nature and the longer walking routes. Those longer walking routes are out of reach for the families who are living in the most highest levels of deprivation. So that gives you an idea of what the landscape, you know, demographically looks like. But when we look at the organisations that should be responsible for drawing in those audiences into nature, what does that landscape look like? The national parks and the workforce that manages those national landscapes is incredibly white. Look at these statistics. 0.6% of the workforce within the sector identifies as Black and Asian. And when you look at the boards that are responsible for managing the landscapes, only 0.8% of representation on those boards that makes those decisions. Those people, 0.8% come from minority backgrounds. So we can safely say that the sector is almost wholly white at the workforce level, but is also predominantly white where the decisions are being made about how those landscapes are managed and how they work with communities to bring them into nature. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what's the problem there? The problem that I have investigated, particularly within the museum sector, is when you have a white-based sector that is essentially unable to recognise its systemic problems in terms of engaging with our underserved audiences, the impact is that those audiences don't feel that that space is for them. And when Patricia talked about the benefits of nature, this means that our underserved audiences, those living in deprivation, aren't able to benefit from the same things that other more affluent sectors of society are benefiting from. So there are real barriers there, you know, ranging from microaggressions all the way through to not being aware of what's on offer and being made to feel unwelcome when they go into those spaces. And this is a headline from the Sunday Times that was released. This is a place just local to me. Last year, lots and lots of families went to the British coastline. There was lots of litter left behind, but this landowner decided to blame the culturally diverse for that problem. And again, we can talk about this in the Q&A, but what does this tell diverse communities about whether they're welcome in nature or not? When we look at the feedback loop, the whiteness of the sector, this all stems from the lack of engagement that children and young people have with nature at a young age. Because when we look at the statistics of who is moving into the geosciences and the sciences in general, because ultimately it's this sector which is where the workforce looks at to hire people. So let's look at the geosciences. 7.5% of the physical geography graduates are Black and Asian. So when you're thinking about once you finish your physical geography degree and you're looking for a job and you want to move into, say, for example, working as a ranger at a national park, you know, what are the chances that ranger eventually will be Black or Asian and be able to bring their diverse voice to the management of that natural space? It's going to be very, very low. And when we compare that to the demographics for physics, chemistry and biology, you can see from the data, it is a very white space. So even myself, who's been in the sector for over 20 years, this is the feedback loop that we're dealing with. We don't have enough children inspired by nature coming from diverse backgrounds. When they do get to university level, perhaps they just don't feel it's a space for them because they're so underrepresented. Then they don't end up working in the sector and the sector remains white. And then it's a feedback loop, which we must break. So how do we break that? We've got to look really carefully at the representation of diversity in our staff and volunteers, all the way through to systemic change within the culture of our organisations that are managing those protected landscapes and those natural spaces. And this happens through inclusive thought leadership. We've got to create a changing culture which will listen to those lived experiences and bring in a systemic change that reflects the diverse voices who are crying out to be engaged with nature. So it's breaking the cycle and changing the system. That's all from me. I'm going to say thank you very much. You can find me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm going to hand over back to Ben.
Thank you very much, Angela. Quite alarming insight there, but really useful to have some numbers. As we've seen recently, sometimes you need an overwhelming amount of evidence for systemic racism before people will even accept it. And often then they still deny that it exists. And you make a very good point that there is a level of privilege that gives you access to these spaces. But the more and more we see about today's topic and the fact that access to natural spaces is beneficial to mental health means that it shouldn't be a privilege. It almost is edging on being a right. People need access, not just they benefit from access and their career prospects and those sorts of things may be improved, but their health is actually being impacted by the privilege gap that we're seeing there. And so it's all well and good to revel in the fact that you earn enough to live 5 minutes from a park and so on, and that is a very wonderful privilege for you to have, but it is definitely a privilege that you should check and try and think about what you can do within your own organization to try and make some positive change. And we said this before, so this webinar is part of a series that we've done with the Inclusion and Diversity team at the RSC. It's important that those who have the privilege share that privilege and try and find ways. We definitely do need more Black, Asian, minority ethnic representation in the job spaces, in the volunteering, but that doesn't mean that all of the work needs to be put on the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. There are things that you can do when you have that privilege to share your privilege and to use it for good. As we've heard a lot in the last couple of years, not being racist isn't good enough. You need to take that further step into being anti-racist. And I hope that the scientifically minded, so the vast majority of our audience, of course, are scientifically minded, having more and more data in order to have those conversations will be incredibly useful and make it easier to have conversations and easier to share your privilege. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. It really does mean a lot, and it hopefully will have a big impact. So thanks
again.
Thank
you, and look forward to the chat now. So after.
Excellent. Well, so I was about to say, yes, Angela will be with us for the Q&A bit as well, so do stick around. We have one more presentation before we'll open up to questions. Lots of good questions coming in, but do keep them coming in and don't wait until the end because we may run out of time. So as soon as you have a question based on anything that you've seen so far, or general access to nature, to natural spaces, and those sorts of things, as soon as a question occurs to you, get it into that questions box and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible after our third speaker, who is Alistair Griffiths, who is the Director of Science and Collections at the Royal Horticultural Society. And unfortunately, we don't have a webcam for Alistair. We did in the test, and then on the day it failed, as is so often the case with these sorts of events. But the good thing is we can hear him, we can see his presentation, and we can still benefit from his fantastic experience. He leads the RHS's skilled team of scientists who are focused on assimilating, evaluating, and sharing current scientific knowledge and undertaking scientific research to provide high-quality, evidence-based solutions to address horticultural challenges. But he also has a significant interest in how gardening and growing plants, and that might just be indoor plants like that little one behind me that perhaps could do with the water, can improve your well-being. In fact, he was co-author of a book called Your Wellbeing Garden, How to Make Your Garden Good for You. So he's not just a plant person, he's a people person as well. And we're delighted that he's with us today. So we'll get his presentation up on screen as soon as we can. And then we will hand over to Alistair for his presentation. Alistair, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for inviting me, Ben and Laura. Much appreciated. So yeah, I'm Alistair Griffiths. Can you see the screen now?
We can see PowerPoint at the moment, and hopefully when you hit the button, we'll see it full screened as well.
Great.
There we go.
Are we
Perfect.
there?
Thanks ever so much.
Perfect. It was really interesting about the last speaker because my hometown is Lancashire. And I actually lived in a place called Haslingden, right in the centre in Council Estate area. And you're absolutely right, the buses were a nightmare. Yeah, many a days walking very many distance, particularly school and back. So it is a challenge, and we do really need to work out how we can best get access to nature, be it on our doorsteps or be it out into nature in the wild, so that people can get inspired and be sort of inspired by it all. So yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done, and I think gardening is a great vehicle for that. I think one of the challenges we do face, though, although this lens has changed slightly linked to COVID-19, is this philosophical challenge, which people have called plant blindness. Wondersley and Schlauser called it plant blindness, and it's an inability to see or notice plants in one environment. And if you can't see those plants, then what happens is you have this element of perhaps not becoming a better steward of it because you don't see that they're valued to you, and therefore, removing plants from our cities or taking away green space can have quite a negative impact in relation to this. And certainly nature and gardening has shown a significant difference. And just to put into context in relation to the evidence, so I just did a quick Google Scholar on gardening and mental health, and it came up for 2020, it came up with 10,300 evidence-based papers. And so there's an increasing body of evidence around the positive effect of physical activity, social and psychological well-being. And the beauty of it is there's actually 30 million gardeners in the UK, and roughly 1 in 2 people actively garden in the UK. There's 700,000 hectares of garden in the UK, and that's roughly 29.5% to 30% of total urban area is domestic garden. The other aspect is that, linked to Oxford Economics, the industry, the horticulture industry that provides those services, is worth 24.2 billion national to the GDP, and there's lots of room to grow in relation to providing nature-based solutions for both mental health and environmental resilience. What I've got here is just to show you a couple of examples of papers. So the time used in mental health was a piece of work that was done by University College London, and it's really interesting. During lockdown, they measured and followed people, and out of 55,204 adults, what they found was that those that did 2.5 hours more gardening each week had significantly decreased in depression and anxiety. Interestingly, those that watched more than 2.5 hours of news on COVID had significant increases in anxiety and depression. We also did a survey of Moripol, the RHS, for people in 2000 during lockdown. 71% said their garden helped their mental health, and 60% said it helped their physical health during lockdown. We did a similar thing with our staff, and it came up with a similar answer. 74.2, the garden helped with their mental health, and 60.1 helped with their physical health. So 3 million more gardeners have taken gardening up due to COVID lockdown, and so that solace with nature is critical. And the reason for that is we're animals. Charles Darwin fought really hard to explain that we are animals, and I think many of us have forgot that. I think we're above that. And if you look at species recovery programs, and if you look at the biological aspects of how you look after, say, an orangutan or a panda, what do you look at? Well, you make sure that their habitat is perfect, their environment is perfect for them to live in. And our cities certainly aren't perfect. And with us removing more and more of that habitat and removing more of that green space, is that the reason why we're having increased anxiety and depression and some of these aspects? So I think we should consider more about our habitats, our gardens as our habitats, because also if we consider that and have more space, be it a pot plant or be it a tiny thing, it was said previously that it is an essential element. Everyone should have a space to grow because it creates a preventative natural healthcare system. And Lord Crisp, who's wrote a very interesting book, talks about preventative healthcare, and he talks about health is at home and hospitals are repaired. So how do we keep the well, and what is the habitat that we need to look at? And there are quite a number of sort of mental health theories around this about why they help us. So Ulrich was the classic study, and basically he had an issue with gallbladders, and he did a study with patients. Some patients looked at views of nature, others had a view of a wall, and he found 3 things from comparing those 2 situations. One was people got out of hospital quicker. Number 2 was that they took less medication. And number 3 was that they were less grumpy to the nurses. So, knowing this aspect of the fact that stress reduction theory linked to nature, which reduces that physical stress and negative emotion, is critical. The other one is Kaplan and Kaplan attention restoration theory. And there are a few others in there about those sort of theories. And, a lot of the evidence base is correlation. And I get a lot of questions constantly saying to me, look, this is all causation, correlation, not causation. But, the causation aspects of gardening. So take vitamin D, for example. Vitamin D comes from the sunshine elements, good for bones, teeth, muscle health. The gardening cycle means that you're outside during the times when the sunshine is out there. Therefore, you're topping up your vitamin D. Also, as you get older, and that's similar about being out in nature. As you get older, your distance, apart from a few people I still know 100 and can run the marathon, you can't move as far away from your home or your environment. And therefore, having the ability to just potter around, have maybe a little balcony or little bits of plants or even containers on your doorstep means that you're actually getting out and topping out, which is a causation. The other element is physical health. And so, you know, this is causation. So the mental health lead, Tim Kendall, has shown some of the evidence and has talked to me about the fact that, you know, it's well known that physical exercise is completely linked to how mental health you're feeling. And, you know, if you take the Harvard Medical School calculator that looked at calories burned in 30-minute activities, you can see that you're burning a number of calculators. Watching TV is probably the worst thing that you can do. You don't burn much, but, you know, you can see things like digging, mowing lawn, are very equivalent to some of the other activities that are done. And the beauty of gardening is that actually you do it for at a lower pace, at a lower pressure, and you're distracted by nature, so you can actually go for longer without feeling as stressed. The other area is food. So when you think about, you know, we know that different nutritional elements, and particularly plant-based diets linked to sort of climate change, but also flexitarian diets, which includes some meat. We know that, you know, food and nutrition is critical for our health and our mental health, and malnutrition can have some quite significant impacts on the physiology of the body. So, you know, better understanding how to grow different cultivars of plants. So take a red pepper, for example. Red peppers have more carotenoids in them as does a green pepper, and they have different properties. There's a broccoli that was bred that's called Bene Forte, which has 4 times as much glycosinolates in it than the other one, which is meant to link to some of the elements of antioxidant, but also cancer-reducing agents within them. So, you know, how we grow and what food we eat is critical for our health. Now, some really interesting stuff, and we're doing some work. So we've created a wellbeing garden at the Royal Horticultural Society at Wisley Gardens, and we're opening up a new hilltop form of garden science on the 24th of June, which is exploring a lot of this. But one of the things we've done is we've created areas with relation to scent. So there is some Japanese work that's been done recently that's looked at things like forest bathing and thanaticides. Now, we know as biologists that certain animals collect chemicals, and they collect those chemicals to protect themselves and defend themselves. So why is that, or why should that not be the case for human beings? And, you know, the phytonicides basically linked to things like alpha-pinene, limonene, other chemistry that seem to have some impacts on this. Now, I've got a picture of lavender here, because if you want to grow a decent plant on you know, just a pot plant outside or a strip, or cut the lavender and put it by the side of your bed, there is significant evidence around the impact on the brain and how it impacts those aspects. And there's also subscribed drugs in France that link to sleep levels. In fact, there was a study that showed that when people had essential oil lavender, it increased the amount of REM sleep that people had. So the chemistry that we're having and what we choose in our gardens in relation to first the pleasure and the aesthetics is really quite important. And so the 5-year postdoc that I've got, Lauriane Chalmin-Pugh, is one of the people that is working with us, linked to Sheffield University and RHS, is to create the new blueprint for wellbeing garden. How much green space do we need? What type of green space do we need? And how do we interact in that green space to help to create preventative natural health care? So colour is another key critical area. So we've just recently been accepted a paper working with the University of Virginia looking at the role of colour, and we've actually got direct measures of physiological and psychological differences linked to different hot and cool colours between different cultures. So really quite interesting. Universally, preference, blue and green, I liked. Yellow, there's a really good paper study that studied I think it's something like 40 countries across the world, and what they found on the emotion, that the colour yellow meant joy to the majority of those people. And interestingly, that colour of the joy element decreased as you got closer to the equator where there was more sunshine. So there are some elements of universal colour preferences. So how do we design those? And things like wave or ecological valence theories all tie into some of these things about preference and lightness. So just looking at this preference thing, it isn't just about hue, red, green, blue. it's about the different dimensions of colour, so the saturation and the lightness. So you can see this graph, the mean colour preference. What you'll see is that the majority of them at the top of the different colours are highly saturated, which seems to be the case, and also some of the lightness elements are really quite critical. And you can get some more emotional preference sort of responses from different saturations than actually different hues. I'm going to take you through some of the studies that we've done at the RHS, working in collaboration with other universities, and linked to the Hilltop Home of Gardening Science, where we're undertaking science to help with regards to resilience of using cultivated plants as part of reconnecting people back with nature, but also linked to environmental and health and well-being benefits. There are about 400,000 garden plants in this country that have an opportunity. But there's lots of information talking about fostering social interactions and promote a sense of community. Gardening is a great social leveler, and anyone can just grab a bit of seeds or do some plant swaps. My first plants, I remember I bought from a car boot sale, the little sedums. I bought them in a little coffee cup, plastic coffee cup for 10p each at a car boot sale, and I was over the moon. And so, you know, you can share and do those. It improves the sense of pride and place. And there's just a recent study that's come out where in the US, they did 471 different types of lots that were vacant and messy in a city. They got the people around them to improve those lots, and then they asked about how did they feel about those lots, because it's not only about, you know, you can have green space on your doorstep, but if there's knife crime and gun crime and drugs, and you're terrified to go into those green spaces, that is also a barrier to access. And when they updated these areas, what they found was that actually the perceived fear had dropped, so they were happy to use those spaces. But interestingly as well, they measured actual knife and gun crime and also saw a reduction in those areas. So here are some scientific bits of research that I've been involved in with other authors. So this was Sean DeBell, and this was linked to Exeter Peninsula School University. And what we did is we looked at the spending time in gardens using the MENE survey, which is the Monitoring Natural Environment survey. And we had an English population of about 7,000, just under 8,000 people. And what was clear that came back is that those gardening and using garden reported better health and well-being, more physical activity, and more nature visits than those who did not. So it's a connector. It's a connector to the natural world, and it builds confidence. Compared to no garden access to private garden was associated with better evaluative well-being, and people access to a private balcony or yard or patio were more likely to meet physical activity guidelines. So this is a second project that, again, I worked with Lauriane Chalmin-Pugh, was my PhD student, who's now is a 5-year postdoc fellowship at the RHS working with Sheffield. But this is a street in Salford. It's, you know, an area that I know Greater Manchester quite well. And so we just knocked on the doors and asked them whether they wanted to garden. And what we were doing was measuring the psychological and physiological benefits of putting some small gardens in. So you can see on the left, that's what some of the gardens look like. On the right, what we did is put 2 tiny little planters in and a tree. We gave them choices for those. And so you can see now just a few trees in quite a deprived area of Salford, and really helping to lift this element of the garden. So what did we find? Well, we found a 6% decrease in perceived stress, which is equivalent to 8 mindfulness weekly sessions. And what we also did is we measured cortisol, which is a measure of stress from saliva. And before the experiment, we had a control. Before, 24% of the people had healthy cortisol patterns. After that intervention, 53% had. So we showed a physiological change as well as a psychological change. We work with social housing on this project, and we also work with United Utilities Water Company. And when we asked them what their front garden helped them to be, happier, relaxed, closer to nature, and also, you know, there was a real sense of pride. And on this street was a drug dealer, and the drug dealer protected the plants. On this street were people that, you know, were in severe poverty, but actually were just lifted by a small bed of daffodils that helped them. So this one here is an example 3. So at Salford, we're up in Bridgewater Garden next week. It's a new RHS garden. It's got quite a community-based focus. And we did a pilot study on social prescribing using the Guideline pilot study. This is Azichi, and Azichi is our social and therapeutic horticulturalist, and we've developed a garden within there. And what we did was a pilot study with some people, taking them through some gardening linked to that. And what you can see here is, again, from on the left-hand side before the intervention, you can see a shift after the intervention from low well-being up into the higher and moderate well-being. So again, having that plants, people, places working together and creating transformation was really, really helpful. So this is a paper that's just been published in Cities. And again, this was survey-based, and the BBC was involved in helping us to advertise this. And we had 5,766 gardeners. And we called out from the BBC for non-gardeners, but in that roughly 1 in 2 people actively garden in the UK, there are not that many that aren't gardening, whether they like it or not, if they have a piece of grass that they might have to tap. But the top thing that came out of this was the pleasure and enjoyment of gardening, and then sensory and then health benefits. What we were interested in when we asked these questions was using some of the medical scales to see, is there a dosage response curve with regards to gardening and the times of gardening. So what we did is we asked them about a measured perceived stress score linked to things about the time of gardening, so from never gardening to daily. And what you can see here is that, you know, as you get increasing in gardening, your perceived stress score, it drops down, it gets better. And if you look at the Edinburgh Warwick scale, looking at well-being score, what you see is that increases over time with the activity of gardening. And if you look at the moderate physical activity, which, I mean, it is a no-brainer really, the more that you go out and garden, the more physical activity you're going to get. You can see that there is, again, an increase. The sweet spot, I think, is probably 2 to 3 times a week in relation to this, but still more work is to be done. So that's sort of the well-being aspects, but every plant also provides a multiple of services, what people are now calling ecosystem services and nature-based solutions, both from an environmental and a sustainable. And you know, it's really important in relation to biodiversity, climate resilience. And so we've been doing quite a bit of research looking at flood mitigation. And you know, again, having vegetation and enabling vegetation to remove those areas is critical. The other area is plants as pollution busters. So research that Tiana Balanusa, as one of my scientists that works here, has looked at different types of leaves. And remember I said there's 400,000 different types of cultivated plants in this country. And we know that some plants can take 20 times more particulate pollution because of their hairs or their scales or their waxes than other leaves. So there's more work to look at how you deal with that. Similar with quiet. A Photinia, red robin, which is one a sort of shrub, takes out high frequencies, whereas a cedar takes out low frequencies of noise. Having a water feature, if it's small, be it 3 decibels or the same sound as the noise traffic, can distract you from the noise traffic errand. So, you know, vegetation absorbs, it scatters, it diffracts. We don't need to build ourselves out of some of these issues. We need to use the natural environment and to actually put nature back into the green infrastructure of our cities. So just showing, you know, the well-gardened mind, body and soul, there is overwhelming evidence now about the stress reduction, the restoration, the relaxation, the mindfulness, cognitive link to rosemary, but hope is quite a critical thing. And then from the body, physical exercise, lower heart rate, there's potential around these phytonicides and phytochemicals within food, vitamin D, and the soul fosters friendships, the social equalities, the pride of place. So you know, nature is really good, and we shouldn't, you know, all nature is good. Yes, there are challenges with some of the elements of nature of cultivated plants, such as invasive plant species. There's probably about 10 of them that are problematic, but the benefits, the many, many benefits, and if you're careful about how you garden, certainly outweigh some of the negative elements of this. All of this, though, is critically important in relation to when we're dealing with the biodiversity, climate, and health challenges, is that how we garden we need to look at how we reduce our footprints and how our gardening handprints can really make a difference in relation to the types of plants we do, the wildlife that we want to encourage into our gardens. So that's me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alistair. We are overrunning, but I hope you will forgive us. It's been such fascinating content that we wouldn't want to pull anything short. Let's see if we can still squeeze a few questions in. I know Patricia is able to give us about 5 more minutes. Hopefully Angela and Alistair can give us a little bit extra as well. Thank you. If you can't, I know you're busy and important people, then thank you very much for joining us, but hopefully we'll get a couple of questions in. So Patricia, given that your time is the most challenged, we've had a comment from Luis, who says he lives in the Sao Paulo metro area, every day wakes up listening to birds singing on his window. But also we had another comment from, oh, there's so many questions, I'm losing them, from Hugh. Now, Hugh said that during the first lockdown, he did a bird of the day app thing, or a bird of the day challenge with his neighbors, and they managed to identify 69 different species. So clearly we know that people are living in urban environments and rural environments. What is the one thing that you would recommend doing to start better engaging with the bird life around you?
Well, I mean, the amazing thing about birds is that they are so mobile and they are really close to you wherever you are, right? Whether it's Sao Paulo or Mexico City or London or Cambridge or wherever. I would say download one of the apps that helps you identify the birds so you can learn what they are, where they come from, and chances are that you're going to be seeing migrant birds that just come either in the spring or in the fall, and they're passing by tropical areas while they're doing these amazing migrations. And just getting involved in that is exciting. Just to let you know, we just had World Migratory Bird Day on Saturday, this past Saturday. And we have BirdLife is part of an initiative that is called Global Birding Weekend that happens twice a year during the migration. We had 50,000 birders, no, and not professional birders. These are people, you know, amateurs and people who don't know birds, who went out in 149 countries and spotted over 7,000 species of birds around the world. And it's just building up that community that we are part of this global system, that we are one species of all millions of species around the world. It just helps you connect, and it helps you remind ourselves that it is, nature is wonderful, is out there, and that you have the opportunity of really seeing. And I completely take the points that Anjana was saying in terms of access, but we also have to remember that you know, nature is everywhere, and as you heard it from the comment from Sao Paulo, birds come to you even if you are in a mega city like Sao Paulo. So thank you so much for having me, and really sorry that I have to step down in 2 minutes, but it's been lovely to be with you.
Well, thank you ever so much anyway. Angela, let's pick up on that then in terms of access. We also had a comment from Dee, who said that your comments and data about Lancashire resonated very much with their experience in North America. Do we think this is an international problem, and are the differences geographical, cultural, or purely economic?
I think that's really interesting observation that came in from North America, that where you have large urban populations, you get quite a high density of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people living, and that kind of divorced relationship with nature. I don't know, I don't really know where to go with that, because it's a systemic problem within the organizations managing nature, the gatekeepers of nature, that need to do the work. So the communities, you know, they can download the apps, they can, if they have that ability to do that, because obviously we have a question of digital poverty, but the onus should be on those gatekeepers who manage nature, who have the expertise and the knowledge to do more to reach out to the community leaders and those community organizations to open those pathways for those families and those communities to see nature for them. It's a very difficult one, because obviously if you, like, I'm going to take my mother as a good example. So my mother came here in 1971 from Kenya. She didn't speak English very well. She worked in a laundry to very working class, you know, and how do we engage someone like that, someone who doesn't speak English very well, who doesn't have a very high rate of literacy, and is working in laundry all day? You know, that is our target audience. How do you bring that person and tell them that nature is important to you, or make you feel better, or give you value to your life? So we need to talk to people like that. We need to understand what they want, what they need, and we need to work at their level to understand how they want to engage with nature. Does that make sense? So rather than patronizing and condescending and saying, we're gonna run a bird box activity with you and we'd like you to come along and make bird boxes with us, I'd like to switch that conversation round and say to the communities, you know, what would you like to know about birds? How would you like to, you know, how would you make a home for them in your garden? And see what the responses are, because more often than not, they might be interested in bird boxes, and it's meeting them halfway.
Michael, in the questions as well, pointed out that there is an increasing interest and awareness of the need for green spaces. The example he gives is that there's a shopping centre in the centre of Nottingham that was demolished, and now that the economic climate is different, instead of replacing it with another shopping centre, they're talking about replacing it with a green space. But that's a very good point, that when we design green spaces, we design them with specific purpose in mind. And if we haven't spoken to the local community who are going to use it, then we might not design it in the way that they would use that green space. Do you think there are ways that we can help to encourage those conversations?
I think actually Alistair's project demonstrates that. So where his project went to Salford and they talked to those residents, what do you want to do with, you know, do you want to know about gardening? Because some people say no. And B, the ones that were interested, they talked to them and they said, well, what do you want to do? We could help you with your front garden. What would you like? You'd like a tree? You'd like a little pot with flowers in it? And I think that is the solution. It's just communication, it's talking and it's understanding, and it's meeting those needs where it's appropriate. And I think particularly where you have high concentrations of Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, they use and see nature in a very different way to white people. So for example, where I was growing up, and I think this is the case for a lot of South Asian and Black communities, walking in nature, going for a 10-kilometre walk, it's not something that they would do, that my family would do, because walking would be seen as, you know, well, why would you want to do that? What is the purpose of that? For my family, it was always like, I have to have a purpose. You're going to walk from A to B and you're going to achieve something. So what are you going to achieve? And it's kind of beginning to work with that community and kind of helping them to understand at their level, actually, yes, you'd gain this, you'd benefit from this, and actually at the end of it, we'll all come together and have this wonderful time, you know. So it's listening and learning.
Alistair, I think we've still got you on the line. I'm hoping we've still got you on the line. So I guess I'll put that to you as well. If we are going to acknowledge that green spaces are important and we're going to replace existing concrete with something green, how do we go about making sure that that is of the most benefit to the most people?
So I think there's two elements here. One is about environmental resilience and climate resilience, and so, you know, selecting the right types of plants that will be able to cope and help to mitigate. So, you know, carbon capture, carbon sequestration, cooling, to provide those properties. But there is very much an aspect, as we did in that street, of an element of co-creation. And in the US, there is a lot of work that with landscapers and landscape architects that do a lot of co-creation. I don't think we're as good at it here, to be honest, in the UK. But I think we are beginning to realise that is the route. And there are some very good projects actually, where like the Thamesmead project, where Phil Askew, he was involved in the Olympic Park stuff, is really getting the community involved, asking them what they want. But there's elements of applying the science that we know to maximise the benefits. So for example, the work we've done on plants for pollinators, you know, we've done work and we know which of some of the mixes of plants, both native and non-native, can attract different types of pollinators. So using that expertise, but at the same time making sure the aesthetics and the beauty help to restore the mind. That would be my view of it.
Thank you very much. We probably really are pushing it. We'll see if we can squeeze in a comment and a question. Shim has said that as an Indian woman, I totally relate to Anjana's childhood experiences. And they're also a volunteer at RHS Wisely. So there's bridging both Anjana and Alistair there with luckily being able, having the opportunity to volunteer for somewhere like that. Fantastic. You're leading the way, very much helping to be visible and so on. So there's one group of people that we haven't really talked about too much so far, but we have had a question about, and I will try and find the person that asked the question. With regards to people who have a disability or who have a long-term health condition and therefore might find that getting out into nature, it's inaccessible, just physically inaccessible to them, even if all of the right gatekeepers are doing the right things and so on. So Alistair, clearly you were talking about houseplants and so on. What would you recommend for people who would otherwise struggle to get out into nature? And
Yeah,
Anjana, what can we do for people who just can't actually access those spaces? How else can we help them? Alistair, go ahead.
So one of the things, unfortunately, last year my dad broke his spine and neck, and that meant that he couldn't walk, and he still can't walk. But there is an amazing project called Horatio's Gardens, and there are more hospitals now that are putting gardens within there. So my dad, even though he went through that, was able to grow sweet peas and aubergines with the gardener in there. If you haven't got access to it, and he's just asked me actually, and I'm going to be pulling together he's got Director of Science and Collections at RHS to help him grow some plants. I'm buying him some pelargoniums, and there's like chocolatey minty ones and orange ones. So I went through, there's about 150 different types of pelargoniums with scent. So it reminded him of his mum and the porch when, so he wanted them. So I'm growing them, and I'll give them that. So what I would say is scents that you like. Palms, I've got a couple of palms, a parlor palm and another thing. And what I've done is I've got an uplifter light that actually lights the top of my ceiling. It's like I'm in a tropical rainforest. Like I'm back in the biome at Eden Project. So yeah, there's little things that you can do. Boston ferns are really easy to grow. So and don't worry if you fail. Don't worry if I fail all the time growing. Just have a go. Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Anjana. So we've talked a lot about the social and cultural issues that are preventing access. How do we help people who are simply physically unable to access these environments?
Well, there are a lot of community foundations out there that are designed to help people that physically can't get into those spaces. So, for example, there are Facebook groups out there where folks can share seeds, and you can actually share seeds and get seeds and grow them in your home. And I think what Alistair said is really, really important. That resonance and that emotional connection you have to plants that you can grow is a huge driver for good mental health. So where we might be talking about diverse communities, what my grandfather did, because he had an amputated leg and I was growing up, and I grew up in a household of like 8 people. My family were growing the herbs that we would use in our Indian cooking, and there are simple steps you can take like that connect you to your culture, that connect you to nature. And food is such a big part of Black and Asian culture, and why not begin to embrace nature in your home, but connect it to your food and your cultural heritage. And there are community foundations, like I said, out there. There are seed banks that folks can borrow from for free or for low cost. There are ways to get there, but the community organisations are the ones that empower and champion the needs of those who can't.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. And thank you to you both for sticking around for so much longer. We're now 20 minutes over. And thank you to the audience for sticking with us when we said this was a little while ago. And thank you for all of your questions as well. It's been a fantastic hour and 20 minutes. We've been very, very lucky to have Patricia Zarita from BirdLife International, Anjana Katwa from Wessex Museums, and Alistair Griffiths from the Royal Horticultural Society with us. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for fielding those questions as well. There are a few resources that we would like to share from the RSC just before we close off. So first of all, Chemist Community Fund, we've talked about throughout this series. They are a resource that the RSC supports that will help any member of the RSC anywhere in the world, and chemical scientists across the UK and elsewhere. They've been doing a lot of very good work, especially in the last year as they've been helping people who've been suffering with COVID. We are now, or they rather, are now launching their wellbeing and listening service. The phone numbers are on screen now. That's private, it's confidential. You can call them at pretty much any time. If you want somebody to talk to, if you need somebody to talk to, if you are struggling with perhaps being overwhelmed by eco-anxiety, which is one of the questions that somebody did put in, the numbers are on your screen now. We're here to help. I am absolutely delighted to be involved with an organisation that does things like this, and I think the Chemist Community Fund is something the RSC should be really proud of. So those details are on screen. Also, in every one of these webinars, we've shared the numbers for the Samaritans and for Shout. If you need somebody to talk to, if you're concerned about your mental health, then these resources are out there. Please take them up. They're there for good reason. They're good people doing good things, and they are there to talk to you, and they can help. We also have some more specific resources with regards to grants and so on to share. We'll get that up on screen now as well. We're setting up an inclusion and diversity fund. As I said, this webinar has been made in partnership with the inclusion and diversity team at the RSC. As of May 24th, so coming up a little bit later this month, they're doing a special call for projects to improve accessibility and disabled inclusion in the chemical sciences. There's a budget pot there, so if you need a bit of money to help get that sort of thing off the ground, then have a look at rsc.li/id-fund, and that special call will be coming out later in the month. All the general assistance grants, which again have been fantastically useful in the last year, rsc.li/assistance-grants. Those are there for a variety of reasons. If you need assistance, or if you need support in caring for somebody else, if you need to get to an event that you otherwise would not be able to for whatever reason, have a look at these. The grants are there, and they're there to support you, the chemical sciences community, to make the best of your career, of your opportunities, and of your life. And finally, the last slide we're going to show, this is part of a series that we ran all of last year. You can find every other episode of this series so far looking at kindness, flexible working, which became suddenly very apparent last year was going to be useful, but also bullying and harassment, LGBT plus inclusivity, and other topics. You'll find them all there. This recording will also go up as part of that series. So a final thank you to the other people who've been involved in making this happen. You've heard Laura's name mentioned already, and hopefully Laura's mum is in the audience, as she often is for this series. So thank you to Laura Reyes and Sarah Thomas from the Inclusion and Diversity team of the RSC. Thank you to Chris Pink and Francis Addison, who've been helping this all run as smoothly as they possibly could with the technology challenges we've had. They're part of my team at Chemistry World, and I am the digital editor of Chemistry World. I will be delighted to see you for the next Chemistry World webinar. Please try and get out into nature if you can. Heed the advice from all of our guests, and don't forget, you'll be able to watch all of this again. We'll send you a link soon, and it'll turn up on the webpage once we've had a chance to process it. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for being the people who care enough to get involved with this sort of conversation. We can all make a difference, not only to our own well-being, but to that of our friends, our colleagues, our neighbours, and our community. And I think we've seen today some really practical advice as to how we can do that. So thank you for sticking with us for so long, and we'll see you for the next Chemistry World webinar. Thank you.